Good evening. My name is Barkha. You're with the Mojo story. Is it going to be a ghar vapsi for Air India to where it all began? Let's bring up a big story on the program today. Bloomberg was among those to report that Air India would be returning to Tata Sons. Remember, it was JRD Tata who launched the airline with just over 2 lakh rupees, something unimaginable. While there was widespread applause and almost celebration for this to happen, the government stepped in to say, hold your horses. The decision has not been taken yet. But business media outlets that have been tracking this story continue to stand by their reports. Tata Sons is indeed the front runner, and now only an official announcement is awaited. Of course, many questions and details also remain. How much of the debt will Tata Sons pick up? Remember, this is the colossal Air India debt that you see on your screen. What will happen to Indian Airlines? Air India is, of course, a natural fit for Tata Sons, but what happens to the domestic routes? And what happens to India without a national carrier? Will the government actually genuinely give up its entire control? More importantly, on this program today, we're going to focus on what this might mean for brand Air India. A glamorous, credible brand in its heyday. Could the glory days of flying return if Air India actually returns to where it all started, with history turning full circle? Let's introduce our panel of experts on the program today. Dilip Cherian, brand and image guru, is with us on the program. Captain GK Bagai, former Air Force officer, but also formerly with Air India, flew it in its glory days. MohanDas, well-known industrialist and a venture capitalist and educationist, is with us. And one of our best-known business journalists, Govindraj, Ethiraj, is with us as well. Welcome, everybody. We're hoping to have Coomi, Kapoor, the author of an excellent book on the history of India's Parsis, including a great chapter on JRD Tata, join us as well in a moment from now. Let me start with you, Dilip. We'll get to the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of this story in a moment. But just from a pure brand perspective, the amount of sort of joy that this piece of news, till it was denied by the government, created, it tells you something both about what the Air India brand used to be and what, frankly, the Tata brand continues to be. Dilip?
Government's likely decision is that it is going to find a home for Air India where it all started. If it had been assigned to, or the bidding had resulted in some other winner, it would have been mired in controversy and therefore doubt. The third thing is that because of the Tatas being the employer of choice in multiple programs and multiple contests and multiple awards, I think the joy is that people have a sense of confidence that their jobs are going to be safe. So I think it is this tripartite of influences, as it were, which makes people feel that the choice of assigning an iconic Indian brand, which Tatas represent, Tatas has taken great pride to make sure that it is seen predates Atmanirbharta, in the fact that the Tatas had set up a whole bunch of industries at a time India desperately needed them, and therefore I think that all of this comes together to create the sense of warm goodwill, as it were, because Air India is likely to be finding a home within the Tata empire.
You believe, Dilip, that despite the denials, that's what's going to happen. And can you just, before I open it up for the panel, explain what that might mean for brand Air India? I think you make a cogent argument about why, despite the denials, it's going to be the Tatas. What will that do to the image of Air India, sometimes celebrated for its national service, stepping in during moments of crises, but other times complained about as this loss-making company that doesn't do well, that needs to be sold? So there's a kind of love-hate relationship that the people of this country seem to have with Air India.
Despite the fact that many of the Tata ventures have had to cut their cloth according to whatever is available, I suspect that in this operation, brand Air India will probably find itself truncated from the very start. No one is expecting that brand Air India will spread things, do things that the airline never planned to in the past. There are two reasons for this. The aviation industry across the world is going through an enormous period of crunching. And this crunch is based on the fact that business travel is predicated uh, to reduce up to 30% even in the next 5-year horizon. So the top spenders in any business, in any airline, are business travelers, the people who occupy the front rows that many people on this panel do occupy. So brand Air India will not be an expensive brand. It will be a controlled brand. And I think that its global ambitions will be confined to the areas where India has substantial traffic rather than just egoistical whims and fancies of some expansive minister who wants to show that we are, our flag is flying across the world. I think the TATAs learn about brands that they manage.
That's very interesting that you don't actually see the glamour of flying or aviation return. There could be other reasons for that. We're, of course, living in a COVID pandemic where flying has also altered fundamentally. But you do, in fact, see it now as a sort of bottom line oriented airline. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's first, of course, look at what we think might happen. Govind, if I can bring you in, and then Mohan, and then I'll go to Captain Bagai and Coomi Kapoor. Do you believe that this is a done deal, Govindraj, Ethiraj, despite the denials?
I don't know. I mean, I would have, from what I understand by talking to colleagues in the profession, I think the feeling is that it was a done deal, at least agreed upon. And maybe for whatever reason, stakeholder management, atmospherics, the government doesn't want to announce it now, or something else completely different has happened. But at least till I know or I knew, the deal was in favor of Air India, because given everything else, including the amount of money that they're going to bring in the form of cash, and the agreements in terms of what will be, the haircut and so on, I think all that was largely done and in Air India's favor, as I understand from maybe as recently as yesterday.
And what do you think that might do to the airline? There are lots of unanswered questions, Govind, including what happens to the domestic sort of part of the business.
No, I think I think to pick up where Dilip left off, I think the character of this airline going forward cannot be the same as it was earlier, because if it is to operate like a business, then it cannot operate in the way it was operating earlier. So to that extent, the brand will evolve. No, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. The one thing you have to remember is, particularly when it comes to international NRI traffic, Air India still evokes good memories. People feel, even whether it's true or not, that Air India serves good food, it's hot food, they take good care of old people, all of it, which may or may not be true, but the perception is strong. So I think similarly within India, I think Air India largely does a good job in particularly on its domestic routes. I mean, I've used it, and many people I'm sure here have used it, and it's competent. Now, is it my choice on a normal day? It may not be the case. So if I were to look ahead, if Tata's come in, there's obviously going to be a lot of pruning and cost cutting and shaving off and all of that. So the new airline or the new version of that airline will be and should be quite dramatically different. The employees, I mean, the numbers seem to be okay. The age and the experience ratio is what it should be for a new airline or a new generation airline. So there's a lot that's going to change now. But on the other hand, the brand is still strong. On a normal flyer does not think like us, maybe so-called liberal journalists or business viewers. You just care about Air India. It's a good airline. I'll fly it. I'll buy a ticket. And I think to that extent, this can fly.
But
I think that.
Yeah, sorry.
Just two quick points. So, I think you had from a government's point of view, I think this was the best time it can and should get rid of Air India from the government's point of view, given where we are otherwise. From the Tata's point of view, I don't think it's a very good time. I think they've already got two airlines. I think it's a very ego-driven exercise, all of this. And how it's going to get assimilated and absorbed within the Tata Group with all that money coming in.
Ego or emotion, Govind? Ego or emotion?
Okay, yeah. I mean, they're very similar in circumstances like this. So I don't know. but it could be either. But I think that's definitely a point of worry.
Okay, Mohandas Pai, there are two things I want to flag here. One, that Piyush Goyal only recently was taking a swipe at the Tata, at the House of Tata. So if this goes through, I think it would be quite ironic. Two, I don't actually agree with Govind. I think Air India, at least the international part of Air India, is seen as quite prized simply because of the routes it has, and also the fact that it owns so many wide-bodied aircraft. I don't believe that the Tatas would be making this decision purely from sentiment, though of course Ratan Tata, with his penchant for flying, also has an active attachment to the airline apart from the JRD Tata legacy. Mohan, how do you see these developments?
Barkha, I would see it as a part of the Tata's strategy for the airline industry. Remember, they got two airlines, a low-cost airline, Air Asia, and then they got Vistara, which is a premium business airline, and Vistara is expanding. Now, for their airline to expand globally, they need landing slots, and landing slots are not available because they're all part of the bilateral agreements, right? And Air India has got the best landing slots for any airline in this country. So it is a part of their expansion. And remember, as part of the deal, they're taking over just those liabilities that they want. They'll be taking over the business with assets and liabilities to match the asset. They're not going to pay a premium. They're not going to overpay the government, etc. And from what is seen in the media, they made a study to see how they could reduce costs. From all figures, that the Air India was making a small operating profit, losing on depreciation and interest and maybe lease rentals. Now, lease rentals are being renegotiated because the Tata brand and their rating, and interest rates will be reduced because the debt will come down substantially, and they will be able to reduce a lot of costs. I mean, the inefficiency of Air India is legion. I mean, people know about what they do. So I think that they will have a viable, it will be part of the strategy. Yes, there is nostalgia for them to go out a little bit because, you know, it is part of the legacy. And for Chandra to take the decision along with Ratan Tata is fantastic. But it's part of their expansion strategy. And Barkha, airline industry is a capital intensive industry. You know, the Tatas have got a 40,000 crore cash flow in the holding company every single year. 40,000 crores. And they can easily put 5,000-6,000 crores, bear that loss for 2-3 years to build a global airline. So I think it's a good thing what Chandra is doing. It's going to be a tough battle for them to make sure it becomes viable. But I think they will bring it to a very good status. They've got good management, good expertise in the two airline in this particular place. Yes, they could make some losses, but I think they'll sustain the loss. They'll be able to sustain the losses. So I think it makes eminent sense. Though, yes, there is a nostalgia factor.
Okay, so I think the point Mohan is making, Govind, is that there is some nostalgia, but it isn't it isn't that commerce or the bottom line will not be kept sight of when the Tatas or if the Tatas do take over. Before I ask Coomi to tell us about why there's so much nostalgia, what Air India meant to the House of Tatas, I just want to get in Captain G.K. Bagai, who actually flew with Air India several decades ago. Flew Indira Gandhi among others. Captain Bagai, as a former Air India employee, what does this development mean to you if it were to go through? And what does it mean to many Air India employees?
Barkha, as I've heard the other panel members, most of them are talking about the business end of it, whether they can sustain it or not, or it's only an emotional issue for the Tatas. I don't think so. Tatas are not that emotional to pick up a company and then lose money without thinking. This company was, when I joined in 1971, I came from Air Force directly on deputation on the insistence of Mr. JRD with Mrs. Gandhi that they were giving them certain Air Force pilots, but they were coming in the age group which was not very good for Air India because they were coming in their early 40s. And by the time they became captains, they were 50s. So Mr. Tata had insisted on younger people. Fortunately, I happened to be one of those who turned up in this. I was 27 years old. I had I had a lot of experience on jets, and I turned up in Air India. Let me tell you, at that time when we joined, there was an aura about it. As a company, it was not a great paymaster. in any category, but it was a pride to just be a part of Air India. Yes, everybody knows, despite that Mr. Tata had many companies and his empire was much bigger than Air India, but Air India was the apple of pie for him. He personally loved this company. I have interacted with him on the flight deck as a captain. Thereafter, when the generations changed, even when Ratan Tata came as a chairman for a short while, I was deputy director of operations at that time. So I've interacted with him. But what I want to say is that it was not only that there is nostalgia, but certain amount of traditions, the values which were involved in aviation were eroded. Now company goes down and today everybody seems to be bashing Air India. It's very easy to do that. But it's not so. The infrastructure still they possess. As Mr. Pai said, the bilaterals, the expertise abroad. Which other company can have run international carriers the way the expertise of Air India is? Not many, I can assure you. And the ones who are running, you have seen the service. They don't even know what they're doing. So I think it's a great thing if it happens to. It will not only go back to a good management, but it can come out of the morass it has entered.
And I think you make the very, very important point about the mismanagement of Air India. And, Govind, we have to remember that that terrible decision to merge the two airlines that was taken under the UPA, which literally destroyed the Air India brand internationally, which is really where its value lies. Now, I want to come back to Dilip on this idea of nostalgia versus commerce. But first from Coomi, who has a fantastic book on India's Parsis, and profiles many of the high achieving community. The book is called The Tatas, Freddie Mercury and Other Bavas. There it is. Coomi, what does Air India mean to the Tata Parivar?
Well, certainly it is very much an emotional thing, not just a business decision, because the history of the aviation industry in India is inextricably linked with the Tatas. As we know that the first Indian rather than a British airline to start in 1931, it was the mail service, which was started by the Tatas. And JRD, aviation was always JRD's baby, and Air India was his baby. And though he later became the chairman of the Tata Group, he always, concentrated and focused most of all, always. And he said, this is the real industries which I've started from its infancy and seen grow. And even when the government took over, nationalized Air India, he still remained the chairman for many, many years. And though he was the unpaid chairman, he took it as a full-time job. Whenever he traveled on Air India planes, he took copious notes to make sure that everything was right, the seating was right, the coffee was the right type, the beer was the right type. So, his whole emphasis was on quality and on getting the right people into the service. As somebody pointed out in the show, today traveling is very different from the days when the people at Air India were in charge. The people at Tata, were in charge, because then you didn't have the iPads and iPhones and television on the plane. So the Tatas made this image with Bobby Kuka, who was their advertising genius, to make out that a trip on this plane abroad was something like flying on a magic carpet. And to synchronize with that theme, the Maharaja was also put in the picture along with his carpet. But as you say, today it's a very different time, and flying is not the same leisurely experience that it was.
Yeah, so Dilip, come in on that. I think almost all of you think that the brand cannot be what it was in its heyday, and I'm glad we were reminded that Ratan Tata was also briefly chairman of this company. That's something I'd almost forgotten. On this sort of emotion and ego, as Govind called it, versus commerce and the bottom line. How do you expect the Tatas, if this goes through? I have to keep qualifying the if, because we do have a government denial right now to contend with. But Dilip, how do you see? Sorry, Mohan, you wanted to come in on that before I go to Dilip? Yeah, Mohan?
I would be hard pressed to believe that the Tatas took the decision on merit. I'm sure the government would have called them up from the top man in the country and told them, hey, we want this as a national service. Please have a look. We'll encourage you. Tell us what you want to take it over, and we'll work with you to make it happen. Because remember, the government has to get rid of it. The government is losing 800 crores. They lost 75,000 crores. They can't run it. For whatever case, they can't run it. All right? It's a failure and it's declining. The government doesn't want to lose more money. And if somebody else takes it, the government may not trust them. They won't trust a foreign party to have the Air India brand. It carries the India brand. And the India brand has to be a brand taken by somebody who is credible, respected, and who will not damage the India name. And the only people available would be the Tatas, to whom it belonged earlier. So I would say that the top person in this country would have called them up and encouraged them to do it and work with them. That's why the whole structure changed. So I think that had a big role to play also. And the Tatas responded in a spirit of patriotism and nationalism also. It's not purely on merit, because they know if it doesn't work, they're going to lose 5,000 crores a year. And it's taken by Tata's sons. Tata's sons, the private company, holding company, they got the money to lose because TCS gives them 25,000 crores of dividends a year. So, you got to understand all this.
Okay, very interesting. Dilip, do you agree that this would have been a call from the Prime Minister saying, Ratan or whoever he called, make this work, we'll meet you midway. Let's make it happen together. And because, the Tatas do have an element of sentimentalism, it would have made it possible for this to happen. Dilip?
There's no doubt about that. The undergrowth in Delhi has been buzzing with this as to what is the non-financial aspect of this deal, and what in return will the Tatas expect to make it viable and financially respectable. To make it respectable is a long thought, but to make it respectable is very important. But to transit from a Babu brand to a Bava brand is a huge leap of faith. I think that Tatas recognize that this is not going to be easy. Don't forget that over years, Air India's mismanagement has stemmed from the very top. And the Tatas take control and really change the brand and make it, as I said, quirky in terms of being a Bava brand, but it has to be hard-nosed business the rest of the time. And unless that happens, what India actually have proven to the world is that we don't have the managerial expertise to run a global service operation. Please understand, an airline is not about wide-bodied jets or qualified pilots. It's about the kind of service that you give passengers who are not expecting to be pampered anymore, and travel has changed in that way. They expect to be safe and on time. And as long as that happens, people are willing to pony up the money that's needed to fly on a magic carpet and evoke all the other stuff that you want. But these two are non-negotiable going into the world of flying.
And you spoke about punctuality. There's a very interesting slice of history. When I was researching for the program today, we actually found an ancient report of what was perhaps then the equivalent of the DGCA, which spoke about Air India's 100% punctuality. The Tatas cared very much about that. JRD cared very much about that. Govind, if I can bring you in, the unanswered questions are: what happens to the debt? Does the government waive off the debt? What happens to Indian airlines? Because Vistara already exists as a strong domestic and, also flying some international routes now. And the structuring of this is very, very unclear.
Yeah, and there are Air India has 5 subsidiaries, and the combined balance sheet I think is I think there are a lot of questions to which I'm sure the Tatas have already found most of the answers. So there is nothing like Indian Airlines now. It's the Indian roots of Air India. There is Air India Express, but that also flies overseas, or largely flies overseas, including to the Middle East. So I think it's better if we wait for the details and see how the Tatas have carved this out, and if they will, and what the deal structure finally looks like. I think there are two or three issues that perhaps might make sense going forward. I think one is who is the person that the Tatas are going to bring in to lead this whole airline or this conglomerate now of Air India, Vistara, and Air Asia. The talent is very, very critical, and talent is also extremely difficult to find anywhere in the world when it comes to airlines. And you should just ask the other airlines, and then they'll tell you this. The second is, I think, in a way, despite everything, despite the fact that this is so many years being delayed, if it happens now, the government should get some credit for finally doing it. This has been the badge of government failure when it comes to letting go, and for good reason, because politicians, babus don't want to give this up, because this is a perk that they enjoy, both within the country and outside. And if the government is giving this up at whatever cost and at whatever point, I think they deserve some credit. Now, therefore, can we look ahead and say that similarly, will the government continue to disinvest and divest from areas that are non-strategic? And therefore, to that extent, will the government focus more on doing on governance and less on business? So, to me, I mean, after all these years, I've covered Air India and interviewed managing directors of Air India for maybe 25 years now. And this, in a way, comes as I don't know if closure is the right word, but at least a good turning point in the airline
No,
history.
definitely. I mean, I think, frankly, unlike all of you, I don't think it's a lose-lose for the Tatas. I think it's still, there is still a kind of brand recall, a brand value to Air India. Everything now depends on how, I think, as Dilip said, can it go from being a Babu brand to a Bava brand is a very interesting way to put it, because let's also remember that the bids failed the last time around because the government wasn't willing to give up total control. And the government has to be willing to surrender its control over Air India if it has a chance to fly again, metaphorically. Coomi, if I can ask you, what is a Bava brand? Not just because you represent the community, but when Dilip says Air India now must be reimagined as a Bava brand, not a Babu brand, talk a little bit about what those characteristics would have to be.
Well, I think a Bava brand would be one where great emphasis is laid on ethicality and high standards and looking at the nitty-gritty of things. And to be fair, I'm not an expert like the rest of the panels, but I have noticed that when I fly on Vistara, which is a Bava brand, it's always been on time usually with me. So Bava's, look on it not as a money-making venture alone. Air India for JRD Tata was never just a money-making venture. It was that he was in love with planes. So is his Mr. Ratan Tata, his successor. So I think they've taken it up as a challenge, but I think they were always interested. I don't believe that they were told to take it up. I've seen in the past also, Mr. Ratan Tata has been very keen to take up some major business gambles, whether it's Chorus Steel or Jaguar. So they like to promote the brand and make it bigger.
I tend to agree with you.
Success to them.
Yeah, before I go to Captain Bagai,
Barkha,
you wanted to come in? Yeah?
Yeah, but I think, Barkha, see, we have to remember one thing. Rahul Bhatia was a nobody. And then suddenly, one day he brought in, he said, I'm setting up an airline. I was just running a travel agency or a travel related business. And then, Indigo went from nowhere to maybe 260 aircraft that it is, plus roughly 35-40% of the market. See, the world has changed. It doesn't take decades to set up businesses, as Mohan would know for sure, since he invests in them and sells and so on. So I think, yes, we all, I think it feels good that Tata will take this over and run it. But they too know that this is a cutthroat dog-eat-dog business, not just in India, but anywhere else of the world. And therefore, they have to run it ruthlessly. While on the brand side, they may create a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling. But as a business, it has to be run ruthlessly, or that'll be the end of it. And remember that there are two more airlines that are coming back into the market. There's one that's been funded by, or partly funded by, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, which has a former Jet Airways CEO, Dubey running it. And there is Jet Airways itself, which is coming back, though it's not clear in what form, shape, and size by next year. So it's going to be, once again, a very, very competitive market. And therefore, Ratan Tata and the Tatas will need a lot more than just a good fuzzy brand and the Bava approach, as you called it, to make it a success.
Okay, we'll get more into that, but I just want to say in defense of Air India before I go to Captain Bagai, the fact is that if the government does indeed surrender control, I'm curious to know what would happen in times of crises. And when I talk about crises, I'm saying the kind of evacuations, for example, that have taken place as part of the Vande Bharat program through the pandemic. Before that, the kind of evacuations that have taken place through conflicts and war. Whether it's in West Asia, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Kuwait earlier, right? These are the pictures you're seeing of Afghanistan, for example. So, one does also have to acknowledge the work that has been done by Air India in these moments of national crisis. Many pilots have played with their lives, have sacrificed their lives. But Captain Bagai, there is the bitter truth of a very, very competitive market. How do you think Air India would need to be reimagined to be competitive in these times? And, I often hear, and I know so many Air India employees personally who say, look, we do our best. We're just not managed well. We're just not managed professionally.
Well, there are two aspects to it. First of all, talked about the business end of it. Yes, the old fuzzy look is different. Maybe the feeling will be there. There is a little, definitely there is a amount of emotional attachment to the Tata Sons. But at the same time, the new model, whichever it takes shape, has to be very, very competitive. But it essentially doesn't have to be competitive to the extent that you clean up your own seat before you get up so that the next flight can go off after 40 minutes. Now, that essentially, I don't think the passenger sitting in first class will like. So that's why international travel is slightly different than traveling from domestic airlines A to B, B to C. So for that, one has to have experience, expertise. And the other airlines which are coming up, which somebody mentioned just now, the CEOs of those airlines are the same who shut down two airlines. So I don't know.
That's a good point. Coomi, before I give
So
MohanDas and
talking very loudly about the new CEOs who just shut down one of the good companies. And surely the company wasn't shut down by the employees. It was the management which did it.
Yeah.
And
So
definitely they knew what was happening and continued that path. Well, I'm sure Tata's have, if Tata's take over, because as you said, even the government is not committal as yet.
Yes.
If it takes over, I'm sure they have looked at all aspects. This is not purely out of old man JRD's love. We all loved him. We still do. That was a different age. Nobody can be him. But at the same time, yes, this company has so much of infrastructure, so much of property, which we can't imagine today in Bombay, that, the amount of land we own in Kalina and areas around. This can be a great asset. As far as the merger was, somebody talked about Indian Airlines. Indian Airlines is a part of Air India now. It's not separate. So it will have to be taken care of.
And I think those are the unanswered questions. I do have to start wrapping up now. But before I give Mohan and Dilip the last words, Coomi, is there any anecdote while you were researching your book that leaps out in terms of understanding how the Tatas do business, a kind of approach to business that they would bring to Air India as well? Coomi?
Well, I can give you an anecdote which was at the start of Tata Aviation. When JRD started his mail service company, he was in partnership with a gentleman called an English pilot who was supposed to get 1/3. After a few years, the Tatas looked at it and decided that there was no reason to give 1/3. And then they said, I've forgotten his name. I think it's Peterson. But he said, then I'm getting out of the business. So then they consulted a lawyer, and the lawyer said that legally you're not entitled to give him 1/3, but ethically you should. And then JRD felt, justified that he could tell the Tata board that yes, we should give him that 1/3 because ethically it's the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's so much sort of ringing brand endorsement right now for the Tatas. Actually, it's not just the government feeling relieved. I think, as someone said, that it's managed to shed and divest Air India. I think it's also a kind of a hat tipping to the Tata brand. The way this has been received. Dilip, before I give Mohan the last word on the challenges ahead, is it your belief that this will definitely go through this time despite government denials, or do you think something could still go wrong? And I ask this because we've been hearing about the Tatas taking over Air India now for many, many years, actually. Dilip?
I think that there's no doubt that this deal is now at the edge of fruition. Several other moving parts have actually fallen into place, from defense aircraft, parliament contract to build a new parliament, etc., etc. So there has been a ramping up towards this culmination. As Mohandas said, the fact is that government showed the hole in its budget one public sector unit is creating. So government is doing this because it has no. There has been pushback. What you said about rescue Indians stuck in many countries, etc. Those strategic issues are no longer what is holding it up. All that's holding it up is the fact that you need to make sure that the deal is structured in a way that everything works for the incumbent who will take over, and make sure that it's a successful and hopeful airline which will last for many years to come.
Okay, Mohan, what do you still see as the challenges ahead? Because I think you make the point, and mostly we agree that despite the emotion or the ego or the nostalgia or the sort of ghar wapsi of it, this is a competitive market. That said, 2 airlines shut down, but 2 new ones have opened. So it's a little bit like, despite the broken revenue model of aviation, you've still got a pretty crowded market.
Yeah, Barkha, that is true. It's a very competitive market. But remember, the Tatas run the largest, high-quality, most profitable service business in the country, and one of the largest service business globally, TCS, and make a lot of money. They know operational excellence like nobody else. These are the old Tatas of the steel plant, hiring 60,000 people, run like a fiefdom. This is the new Tatas with Chandra at the top. And Chandra is a very hard-nosed business person who knows how to earn money, and has done it and is performed. And they know how to run an international business. So this requires operational excellence, and they will bring it. This requires technology. They know that. They already run 2 airlines. And like Coomi said, Vistara is an outstanding airline. It's very high quality, very competitive. Yes, they're losing money, and they're taking it over. I'm sure they build a very, very good business. The odds are in their favor. And to me, Barkha, the most important thing is the name India. This carries the word India. It is India for all of us. It is India in our hearts. Imagine somebody else taking it. I mean, Emirates and the Middle East taking it and running it as India. We can't live with that. We are emotional people. And the other person, Spice Jet, he's a nice guy, but he doesn't have money, right? He has no money. So you require the right kind of person, and there's a right fit. And also remember, Barkha, the important thing, government has been extremely flexible in the way this was being sold. They reduced the debt, and they said you bid for what debt you want. These are the assets, and you will not have any old liabilities. They took out all the liabilities. It has been structured beautifully to make it a success. And I'm sure the Tatas will make it a success. All of us should support them. And for all of us, Barkha, to see Air India fly again with a great quality will give us a sense of pride. And this is what we want, is India. And we want India to be owned by Indians.
I think Govind is hell-bent on making us non-sentimental. Govind, are you wanting to say something? Can't hear you, Govind. Can't hear you. I don't know why we can't hear you, but Govind, we can't hear you. Govind, we can't hear you.
I said, as a taxpayer, I'm delighted that this is happening, and as an Indian, I'm proud that Air India will remain in India in the hands of an Indian company.
Well, win-win on both sides then, commerce and nostalgia. If it goes through, can you imagine if it doesn't, the sense of disappointment and anticlimax it will create? But I don't think any of us believe that it's not going to happen. Leaving it there, Captain G.K. Bagai, Govindraj, Ethiraj, Dilip, Cherian, MohanDas, and Coomi Kapoor with a delightful book on India's Parsis. If you haven't read it yet, do please pick up a copy. It's an absolutely delightful book. Thank you to our audience. Have a great weekend, but we will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you for watching. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.